Hey everybody, welcome back. So we have the sort of basic idea down for the start of the track. So how do we go from here to the chorus? Well, first off, I can tell you that it actually took quite a few attempts to land on what I considered was the right idea. The one thing I did know was that I wanted a sort of nice, hard, bouncy future house sound, but the actual melody of it, I tried sort of many different ideas. In the end, the idea that I went with was fairly simple, bassline-wise, but it integrated other elements of the track, like the vocal and the dark pad sound that we've created, plus a couple of other sounds. Now, I just want to talk very briefly about what makes a future house chorus, and then we'll dip back into this understanding as we progress through the course. Now, this sort of is a rough outline and is a guide only, and you can break the rules of this and do more of one thing or another, but this is sort of a good general guide for making a future house chorus section. So in most future house tracks, you'll have sort of one main bassline sound that makes up most of the chorus section, but you will then have other sounds. These could be other bass sounds, lead sounds, vocal sounds, etc., or even effect sounds that act as embellishments to the main bassline. Very rarely will you have one bass line that plays consistently all the way through, although it does happen, but normally it is broken up by these other elements that are brought in at various times to give the chorus a bit of flavour. Now, coming up with a main bass line is not super difficult, although you might have to go through a few ideas before you land on the right one, like I did, but the bits you use for the embellishments to break up and funk up the bass line can take a bit more experimentation. Now, one thing you can do is use elements that are already present in your track. I mentioned the vocals. So what we'll do later on is use chops or slices of the vocal, likely with some sort of pitch and or formant shifting on, but we'll also create some elements that are not already present as well, like some high energy bass parts, for example. And as we sort of progress through the tutorial, we'll also look at the nuances of this process and how to make each sound you use fit in and also sound nice and big, so each sound in your chorus has a big impact. So that's just a very quick overview of how a future house chorus usually works. Of course, there are drums as well, which we'll get to later, but they are more about sort of adding energy to the chorus rather than texture, which is kind of more what we're talking about here. So let's just get in the bass line for the chorus. That's the main thing we'll be doing in this lesson. Many of the elements I mentioned that we're going to be adding as embellishments we'll add later in the tutorial, like the vocal, but I just want to get the basic idea for the bass line down. All right, so let's copy across the kick, and I want to leave a section, so from bar 29 to bar 37, I want to leave that clean, because that's where our sort of build-up section is going to go. So just copying across the kick, start bar 37, let's just loop that. And I'm also going to add another instrument track. So once again, this is going to be Vital. Sorry, you can't see, this is just off the screen, but I'm just selecting Vital, Stereo, Add Track. And once again in Vital, we're going to use a preset. So we'll go up to the hamburger menu, open external preset, navigate to where your work files are downloaded, Vital presets, and we want the future donk. Load that up. As you can hear, nice and donkey. And again, if you did buy the course, you can actually load up the video where we show you how to make this sound from scratch. So the bassline pattern or notation, like I said, is fairly basic. If you actually bought the course, you'll find in the work files, let me just navigate to that. In the work files, you'll find that you have a MIDI folder, and in there is the bassline MIDI. So if you want to, you can just drag that in. But I'm going to actually build it from scratch here. Let's just put that over the section, the chorus section. And to get the sort of notation or the notes that we're going to use for the bass line, I first looked to our original melody, basic though it is. So simply A, F, D to start off with. But I didn't want it to be so drawn out. Obviously in this section, we've got like 2 bars for each note. I really want to see you tonight. So I didn't want it to be quite so drawn out, so we've changed it to every single bar. So let's just start drawing that in. Now we know we're in A, first note is A. Let's just turn that down a bit as well. It's a little bit loud compared to the rest of the track. Okay. So one very, very common sort of pattern to use is using every 3rd 16th. So you'll recognize this straight away. Okay, one of the most commonly used patterns in any kind of house music, but it works and it sounds good. So just drawing in a really basic pattern. And notice I'm using some notes which are going to be shorter than others, which just varies it slightly rather than all being the same length. And then we know we go from A to F, that's what the other melody does. And we're just going to use the 16th pattern that I'm talking about, also referred to as dotted time. And then if you remember, it goes A, F, D. In the pad, it actually goes A, F, and then it jumps up to D, whereas we're going to go down to D. But it's still the same basic notes. And again, we'll just have that basic every 3rd 16th pattern in here. Just going to root this as well. So this is one of the things that definitely wants to be sidechained. And I will talk about that a little bit more later on, but for those of you who have done any of our beginner tutorials, you'll know that when you've got the bass line and the kick playing at the same time, you really have to sidechain the bass line to the kick. And we've already sort of covered how to set that up, so I'm just going to simply route the bass line through to the sidechain group. So I'm just going to select sidechain there. So now when we play it, and if you notice, if you listen very closely to a before and after of that, you'll find that the kick suddenly becomes much more prominent because the bass from the bass line isn't interfering with the bass from the kick, meaning that the kick has much more space to sort of do its thing. All right, so let's just carry on. Now we've sorted that out. And then I want it to go did. So let's just get in the last bit. And then we just got to have a little sort of flick here to bring it up to that note. So it's just using the existing notes that are already in the sort of pattern. And then here we're going to have some sort of other sound, some sort of fill sound to make it a little bit more interesting. If we've got time, we'll get to that in this lesson. But if not, we'll get to that later in the tutorial. So now for the second half of this bassline melody, we'll definitely want A again for sure. So I'm just going to copy that over. And I'm going to mix things up a bit here. And rather than F, we're going to go up to C, but using the same pattern as the second bar there. And then we're going to drop to an F, so I'm going to copy that same pattern again. Have that there in the 7th bar of this little bassline melody. Let's just play what we got. And then for the last bar, we're going to have another sort of fill sound. We'll probably use that dark pad that we've already got in the project to sort of have some fill in here. But I'm just going to copy up this last note to F, just to give it a little bit of a flick before, whatever it is we do comes in later. All right, so that is the sort of basic idea for the bass line. Very simple, basically just using the notes that we've got here. So we use all of these, A, F, D, C. Apart from B, I don't think we use B, but that's fine. All the other notes are already notes that we're using in the other melody. So one last thing we will do in this lesson is add what I was talking about here. So midway through this sort of bass line, we're going to have an embellishment. So I'm going to load up another vital. In fact, before we do that, I'm just going to quickly rename this bass line, just so we know what it is. And then I'm going to add another track. And yet another vital, stereo. Let's just call this Fill 01. And for this, we're going to load up another preset. Again, if you want to know how this was made, I'll show you that in a separate lesson. So I'm going to go Open External Preset. work files, vital presets, and we want bass squiggle. Okay. Before we go any further, let's just turn this down. This is a pretty grimy sound. So it could be used for many different things. We could even use it to add a bit more to the bass line, which we might well do in the second half of the track, just to add a bit of dirt to it. But for now, we're basically just using a couple of notes to introduce a fill into the track. So that's going to go here, of course. Let's just have a little listen, see what we can come up with. Something like that. Let's just draw it in. And we definitely want to sidechain that as well. So let's go into the settings, change the output to the sidechain group. It's a little bit loud still. Let's just turn that down, get the balance about right. Now, one thing that we'll keep going back to as we build the chorus up during the tutorial is that these extra sounds that we're putting in, these embellishments, they definitely want to have reverb on, and they want to be loud enough that they really become part of the chorus, or a standout part of the chorus. So it could be just a fraction louder, I think. And we might want to add a bit more reverb to that, but we'll get to that later if we need to. Let's just have a quick listen. So you can hear there, we're just filling it out with these little sounds. Now, later on, we'll have more breaks in this original bass line, like for example, at the end of bar 2. So here, we'll probably cut the bass line out and we'll have some vocal samples thrown in there as well, but we'll get to that. Now that's it for this lesson. In the next lesson, we'll start structuring the chorus and start to add some drums and discuss their role in future house. Thanks very much for watching, guys and girls. See you in the next one.